Hey, folks, welcome back to the Pulse. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat. And guess what? It's that time again. It's 11 o'clock Central Texas time, and it's time for Right Side Up in honor of my buddy Steve Staggs. For those of you who are new to this channel, we had 393 people across 3 platforms yesterday when we were talking about crypto. So if you're somebody that's kind of coming over from that content, what you'll realize is every Friday at 11 a.m. Central Time, I do this podcast, which is about Jesus, right? And I want you to be aware that this is the content, and it may be something that you're interested in, but the approach that we take is different, and that's what's so amazing. My spiritual mentor and friend Steve Staggs passed away after episode 37, and I've continued this in honor of him. We're on episode 71, even though it says in the description 30. It's from episode 30, but this is episode 71. I'll update that later. But I wanted you to be aware of that. And the premise of this whole thing is we take a clip and we listen to and reflect on the teachings of Steve Staggs, and we just remind ourselves why we're here. And so if you're somebody that wants to kind of understand the ethos of what I bring to the table, it's really this idea that is very, very simple and fundamental. And that is that Jesus is alive and he speaks. And for somebody who, I would say my Christian conversion happened about 24 years ago. I was 28 at the time. And what's really interesting to me is I would go to church, and I still do. And on Easter Sunday, people would say, look to your left and look to your right and say, he is risen, right? Jesus is alive. And what's interesting is I came to understand through spending a lot of time with my buddy Steve Staggs, is that a lot of times within the church, we're basically told about a historic Jesus, a past Jesus, not a living one that is at work, that has a plan, that is strategic. And so this is really amazing because it's refreshed me and has created a bit of a revival in my heart for the gospel and the true gospel. And that's what I'm so thankful for my buddy Steve Staggs. So if you're somebody that's coming over for crypto, you might want to hang out, because at the end of the day, we ask the question, ultimately, are you interested? First, we're going to get into the chat, and then we are going to get into the content. I'm so glad that you're here. I think if you sit through this, if you're somebody who hasn't engaged with this topic before, I think you're going to be really surprised, because it's really Steve's whole life was focused around the disciplines of having a relationship with Jesus and literally asking him, hey, how do you see this? Right? And literally expecting an answer. And over 42 years of doing this on the back of a professional baseball career, it's incredible what has come from that. And of course, that's no different than what you probably were taught in Sunday school if you went, right? This Jesus, he's alive and he speaks. And the question is, are you listening? Are you interested? Lucky369, Lucky Luke, what's up? Love your content. Keep up the great work. Hey, thanks for being here. Appreciate you joining us on Friday for Right Side Up, live for the first time. What's up, buddy? Heartbeat, what's up, man? Mike, the mystery man, Florida Mike. Actually, Steve talks about Mike in this clip that we're going to be looking at today. The only place I'd like to be on Friday with Matt and Steve and Jesus and all you guys, and that's the great thing about this. We're just reminding each other what the truth is, and it's encouraging. That's one thing you're going to find from this content. We have these 70 episodes are in a playlist on my channel. So if you want to learn more, it's in podcast format as well. And then there is a Telegram group called Right Side Up. It's linked in the description, and you can join us, right? We have these conversations. You can get the quintessential writing called the 1960s White Paper that was written by Steve Staggs. If you come into that group, it's a pinned comment, so you can check out that. I would encourage you want to understand all of what we've talked about, these 70 episodes, that will give you a really good primer for it. Sam Kemp, God is good. It's so great to see you. Thanks for all your support. She4, amen. Carter Hill, hey guys, blessings to you. John May, what's up? Still here somehow. Folks, we're moving into an amazing time. This is a crisis era, and we're going to be talking today about trials, right? Consider it pure joy when facing trials of many kinds. How do you consider it pure joy when you're going through something that you can barely even like breathe through? And that's what Steve's gonna be talking about today. Carter Hill's interested. Francis Paul, what's going on? All right, let's get into the content, and I'll be back, and we'll talk about what Steve had said. I'm going to be taking some notes. This will be the second time or third time I've listened to this, and it's really, really good. So thanks for being here, and let's hear from our buddy Steve.
Oh, wow.
I know that's a lot.
Well, and because every situation is unique unto itself. So it's trying to offer a general context of perhaps, approaching it without making it so specific to the individual situation. I think of Mike, for example, on the stream.
Yeah.
Mike went through a very, very specific situation that, yeah, a lot of people have gone through, and they could have given Mike all kinds of input and thoughts about it, but not a single one of those would have applied to him in a very specific way, except for his personal experience, which he then has talked about, here and there. So, general idea, without attempting to be so specific that it tries to define what an individual will experience, because there is no substitute for the individual experience.
Yep.
Mike will carry that with him forever. So with that kind of a little bit of a caveat, I mean, it's the same thing. A person has to be interested. If a person is not interested beyond the everyday part of living, then none of this is really going to make much sense. But so let's talk about it in the context of somebody who's really interested. One time, Jesus came to me and he said, I want you in the group that you're working with here, which was a computer business, software. It was a software development business. He said, I want you to put together a job description for God. You want us to put together a job description for you? Yeah. Well, how do we do that? Well, if I told you, then you wouldn't be putting it together. So I want you to put it together. I want you to take some time as a group to think through this. If you are the one, you guys are building job descriptions all the time when you hire people for a role. So God is a role. The supreme being put together. If you were the one charged with hiring the supreme being, what would the job description look like? It took us a month. Every day for an hour, specific, and then talking about it throughout. We just sit down and just start writing stuff down. And then we took a period of time to look at it and evaluate it. Then this thing probably took us, I don't think I'd be exaggerating to say 4 to 6 months by the time we got it all put together. And one of the attributes of God is that he would have to be the same regardless of the situation or circumstance or attitude. That the situation, circumstance, or attitude would have no bearing, have no effect on his position and person of God. Let's think about that for a minute. I don't know what it does for you, but that mere thought started answering a whole lot of questions for me. What we want God to do is to remove all of the adverse experiences in our lives so that we can be spared the difficulty and trauma that particular experience produces in our lives. And from God's point of view, it is no. Once you do that, you deprive them of experiencing me in that situation for who I actually am. You talk about a friend who went through that very thing. He went through cancer that the rest of us would be terrified about, would run from, and he says, nope, it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Why? What I would offer is because he experienced God in the center of that thing most traumatic, and it paled in comparison to him.
Hmm.
So that's one thing I would offer, that the nature of God and the person of God, the role and position of God, is that he is bigger than any situation we can ever find ourselves in. And we only discover that when we enter into a situation that is way bigger than us. It's at that point we start seeing the massive nature that he possesses that dwarfs anything that we talk about or can experience. Paul calls it momentary light affliction. He saw that contrast. And until you see that contrast, you can't experience it. Mike experienced it.
Hmm.
He talks about it. I'm getting ready to get my chest cracked open. I don't have any idea what's going to happen. I don't even know if I'm going to wake up. What's going to happen with my mate if I don't wake up? What this, what that, what the other thing? And what did he experience? If he were to tell you the story, he felt this amazing presence of Jesus with him that dwarfed all of that. So that's the first thing. No matter what the circumstance or situation, God is bigger than that, and he'll show it to you if you're interested in seeing it. The next thing I would probably offer is that came out of this experience of putting together the job description, is that whatever he created had to achieve exactly what he intended, which meant that any circumstance, situation, power, force that encountered it, that his creation had to be self-cleansing. It had to be able to deal with that, to experience it, deal with it, and then cleanse and purge it out of the system. It had to be self-cleansing. Well, guess what? I've experienced that in my own life. We mentioned it just a little bit ago. Probably everybody here that's listening has experienced it. When you follow him, guess what happens? You start experiencing this self-cleansing dynamic. Okay? In the religious world, you have to go jump through all these hoops. You got to repent. And some of the key words are, repent, study, change your behavior, do all of these various things. Well, in the context of the New Testament Bible, the Pharisees were the supreme examples of following that behavioral pattern. And Jesus called them whitewashed sepulchres. No, follow him, come in alignment with how he has built his creation to work, learn how to live in it with him, and guess what you'll experience? This self-cleansing dynamic.
Hmm.
And it happens just as you hang out with him and follow him. You're not trying to change things. You're not trying to, no, the only change in your behavior is, I want to hang with you. I don't know how to do it. Would you teach me how to do that? I don't know the first thing that I'm doing, but I know you do. Yeah, I got this, Steve. Let's go. And this stuff starts falling off like crazy. As the junk falls off, then the next thing that happens is you begin to start seeing things as they really are. Paul's experience, the Apostle Paul's experience, is when Jesus knocked him off his horse. He simply encountered him, knocked him on his keister, and then Jesus simply asked him a question. How long are you going to keep kicking against the goads here? Don't you know you're going somewhere? Have you not considered that the path you are on has purpose? And every time you try to deviate from that, I have provided for you guardrails, goads, that will keep you in check, that will keep you going in the right direction so that you don't end up running off the cliff. And those goads have brought you right here to me in this moment. And here's how that looks. Boom. Knocks him on his can. Not to hurt him, but to demonstrate the enormity of the person he was dealing with. That this path was not without purpose. What happened to him? He crawled away some other place, could not see why. The way the Bible describes it is the scales that were on his eyes. Guess what was happening to his body? It was self-cleansing. And Jesus sent Simeon to him and said, hey, go pray for this boy. I've got things for him to do. I mean, the intricacy with which Jesus is involved in his creation and his people is mind-numbing when you actually experience it. There is no detail so small that he is not intimately aware of it. And by the way, interested in it. So the traumas that we experience, the shortness of time that we live, the way he described it to me is I created the material world to be a disposable commodity. I can go through all of the experiences to train my man without having my man have to carry the baggage of that for eternity.
Wow.
What? Now there's a guy who's thinking ahead. You know, I'm building a portion of my creation that can be disposed of. Because the lesson learned is far, far exceeds the value. And I need there to be a place where he can freely fail. Because that failure is what produces in him the eternal that I'm building in my man, the disposable commodity. Fascinating thing. I've actually written about this a little bit, and I mentioned it in the past, but it struck me so profoundly. You know, if we buy into the basic idea that the creation is about 7,000 years old, then the maximum, if we live to be adults for 70 years, the maximum that we can experience of God's plan is equivalent to an 8-month-old baby. I mean, pause and think about that for a second. If it is correct that the material creation is 7,000 years old, the maximum I can experience of his plan is equivalent to an 8-month-old baby. Well, how much counsel would you pursue from an 8-month-old? By the way, on anything. If somebody's involved in computer science for 8-month-old, how much advice do you seek from them? Okay? And so you can apply that anywhere. So this very short period of time is constructed in a disposable environment where there is a liberty to experience these fundamental dynamics of life that we can then take hold of that prepare us for the next step, because that are no problem to us because the whole creation is designed to be self-cleansing. And God is bigger than every bit of it. He dwarfs it all. Well, you know, once you get a hold of that kind of an idea, it's like, wow. Okay, Jesus, let's do this thing. You've thought way more about this than I could ever begin to think about it. And it's blowing my mind just a little bit that you're sharing. I did not learn a bit of this in Sunday school or sitting in the pew.
No.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but
It does.
It's the kind of stuff that.
Well, I like it. Okay. Wow. The system is self-cleansing. One of the things I pulled out of that just blew my mind is the path you are on has purpose. The path you are on has purpose. So there's so many people, and I know some that are in the chat who have faced trials of many kinds. And if there's anything that's consistent, right, it's trauma, challenge, change. All of these things are consistent. I'm reminded of in the book of John, Jesus saying, "Peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives to you," right? So this whole podcast is called Right Side Up. So we're living in a world that is upside down, and we're expecting, right? If I just have the money, then I'm going to have the comfort, right? So what are we trying to do? We're trying to go to things that are going to give us peace. And I would challenge you. I think anything that we think, that's outside of God himself to bring us peace, that's what we're seeking, right? We're seeking this peace, this love. We're seeking this thing of wholeness, of someone that fully understands us, this peace. And it's this peace that God gives to us, but he does not give as the world gives. And so many of the things, speaking of Jesus, and so many of the things of Scripture are counterintuitive. Why? Because you're experiencing them inside of an upside down world. They fly in the face of what the world says. And we are to be in the world, but not of the world. What does that mean? Well, the whole premise is, are you interested? And so much of the religious system right now, and I'm not criticizing it, it has an onboarding effect. But so much of it is focused on essentially onboarding versus, well, hang on, I don't live in the past and I don't live in the future. I live in the present. And in the present, I have to make choices. And what's interesting is at the beginning, we eat of this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? And what is the promise of the serpent? You will be like God, knowing good and evil. Well, if you listen, previously, this is all a part of the plan that you would be like God, right? This whole idea of being grafted into a family, this idea that you would be able to discern between lookalikes. There are two trees. They both have fruit. They both look good. You can eat from both. Well, one he said, don't eat from. And what's interesting as we go our own way is that our eyes are open. And what is the purpose of the opening of your eyes except but to discern between lookalikes? Because choice and authority is within you. Paul's a great example that Steve points out. Paul on the road to Damascus, right? You probably know this. He's been known as the guy who is persecuting Christians, killing Christians, right? He's standing there holding the coats of folks as they kill Stephen. And what's amazing to me about Paul's story, he was the Hebrew of Hebrews, right? The Pharisee. He was one who understood the law. He was one that, knew this belief system. But God had a plan. And what Steve said, the path you are on has purpose. And so, in the context, whatever you think the length of time the earth has been around, this is a short time window. And what is it that we're to learn and to understand? It says, all things were created for him and by him, and we are sons of God. Right? We're grafted into this family and we have this discernment between lookalikes. And so, we read these historical documents of Paul and the road to Damascus, he gets knocked off his horse and, here's this voice and question is asked and, this is a speaking Jesus and he's blinded. Folks, that's like, you need to see yourself like literally, that's just like today. There's no difference. It's just, you read about it and you think it's like in black and white or something. No. It's an experience just like today. Jesus is the same, past, present, future. And that's what he talked about with this whole job description of God. But imagine this scenario. Jesus himself speaks to Paul. Do you think that was a one-time only thing? No, it's not a one-time only thing. Peter, James, and John go up the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus, right? He's transfigured before them. And who appears? Who appears? Moses and Elijah, the law and the prophets. And they're conferring, they're talking. What are they talking about? And hang on a second. Moses and Elijah are alive, right? God is not a God he's a God of the living. And what's amazing is, Peter, James, and John are like, whoa, it's amazing that we get to be here to see this thing. Maybe we should make tents. Maybe we should make coverings. Maybe we should do something and serve these guys. This is amazing, right? They're seeing a miracle before them, the transfiguration of Jesus. He's talking with Moses and Elijah. And instead of them creating these equal tents, right? One for Jesus, one for Moses, one for Elijah, a voice, there's a cloud that descends and a voice from the sky says, "This is my son. Listen to him." Well, if a voice from the sky says, "This is my son, listen to him," that means that he speaks and you can hear him. Oh, faith comes through hearing. Oh my goodness. This is really, really crazy. So Paul, who we account for like amazing growth of, the gospel around the Mediterranean. He walks basically 4 times around the Mediterranean. He's imprisoned. He's shipwrecked 3 times. Lowered out of a window in a basket, like these amazing stories, but he still had a thorn in his side. Consider it pure joy when facing trials of many kinds. What did Steve say? What is Jesus saying to you? This is actually the way I designed it. So, what's the practical application? Here you are facing trials of many kinds. We know about Mike's trials, and they continue. We know about John May, and they continue. We know about our own, each in our own way, are going through this. And what does he say? Hey, in this world, you're trying to self medicate and say, go away this pain, go away this challenge. I think about David. He recalls when he sees the giant, he recalls, I fought the lion and the bear. Why do you think a lion came? Do you think when the lion was there, David was like, oh, joy, I get to fight a lion? No, he's probably scared to death and like, what do I do in fighting it? The bear. You have to understand that the purpose that God has for you, the world's going to tell you that you're an accident, that you just crawled out of the ooze and some molecules bumped together and poof, there you are. Well, there's an alternative story. It's the real story that actually you were created uniquely, knit together in your mother's womb, that these things were planned out in advance. So the question is, if there's a plan and a purpose for your life, which you hope there is, because it's what you're seeking, right? I win Lambo, I can have this money, and this money's going to solve all these problems. For I had this or I had that, and we're trying to muscle it ourselves. And of course, here's the Steve guy, right? Professional baseball player. The Lord just says, hey, follow me. And he's interested. And he applies the same dedication and rigor that he did to professional sports to Jesus himself. He said, all right, I'm going to take you at your word. I'm going to listen to you. And for 42 years, we hear these stories from Steve. And the most gentle, non-judgmental person you will ever meet. And Steve literally was like, hey, Matt, are you open to another way of looking at this? And what did he do? What was the practice? One, he was interested. He recognized that Jesus was alive and he speaks. And he asked him questions. And what he has discovered, and what I think everything that lines up with all the scriptures that you've likely read, is that this is a living God, a relational God. And it's like, all right, he's interested in your every inquiry. So much of the belief system is saying to you, God is mad at you, right? He was pissed off because you ruined his plan. No, you have to see that this was the plan all along. He doesn't make mistakes. He is not surprised. And so what's amazing about this is this self-cleansing concept that Steve talked about is so powerful, because essentially when you're going through these challenges, it's preparation for the purpose and the plan. But you can make decisions in the midst of that. And that's what the amazing mystery of this is. But the story upon story in the scriptures are about, like the prodigal son. It's us in a nutshell. I want my inheritance now. I want to go my way. I want to control everything. I am manifesting my destiny. I am in control. I'm in charge. Well, what is sin but going our own way? People want to apply it to all these like sexual things or murder and all that. Yeah, included, right? That's going your own way. But if you think about this, you're going your own way in your own nature and character. So what does the prodigal son do? He goes off. He's like, I know better than you, old man. Give me my inheritance. And what does the father do? For love for his son, but also knowing what will happen, he finances his debauchery. He literally goes off. Think about that. That is so planning and foresight of the father, saying, all right, fine, I'll give it to you now. He goes off and spends it all in wild living, which I love that term, wild living. Sound familiar? We go our own way. And it shouldn't be a surprise to you. So many people that I've met have met Jesus, just like Paul, in a massive, massive, difficult trial situation where they get to the end of their capability of muscling it and they see him for who he is. And so much of this is like, I've gotten to the point where my life is unmanageable by myself. I've exhausted everything. I've stuffed everything I can, drugs, sex, relationships, whatever it may be. I've stuffed it into this. And guess what? I still feel empty and without purpose. That's why it's so common when people are like at the top of their game, right? They're like, oh, this is my 5th Super Bowl ring, but I have to have the 6th, right? The money, the billionaires who literally commit suicide, right? We think that these things of the world, but Jesus says, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. And we're looking out the world and we're like, hey, I'll take it from here, boss. I got this. And the son goes off, and what does he do? He squanders all this in wild living. He finds himself, takes a job, and he's feeding pigs, and he's looking down at what the pigs eat. And he's like, man, oh man, these pigs eat better than me. And then he thinks of his father's house. And this is the story. This is the whole story wrapped up in one. He considers his father's house, where the servants in his father's house eat better than he does in his current situation. And he says, well, maybe if I go back, he'll let me be one of his servants, his slaves. But to his surprise, as he comes back, the father sees him far off and runs out to greet him. Think about this. We are lost in this desire to go our own way. And this isn't exclusively reserved for people who don't believe. I go my own way all the time, and I know this stuff. We're constantly challenged with this, understanding, all right, well, how do I do this thing in the present? I can learn about a great, what has happened in the past. I can read the scriptures. I can imagine a future, and I can read the prophetic things and go, oh, wow, some really cool things are going to happen in the future. But I live in the present. And how do I do this, Lord? Show me the way. And what was so refreshing in meeting Steve was he said, why don't you ask him yourself? We're so listening to so many people, right? It's the pastor, it's this preacher, it's this evangelist, it's this whatever. Do it yourself. Ask him yourself. And what Steve said to me, he said, he's interested in your every inquiry. What? Well, think about this. A loving father, if you may not have had a loving father, but imagine a father sitting at the end of your bed and you're a young child and a father smiling at you going, what questions do you have? Steve talked about that with his own kids, that he would sit when they were young at the end of their bed. And of course, they were excited to staying up late. So they keep asking questions, right? Like kids do. Like, we could stay up later if we keep asking dad questions. But he said it was the greatest joy. It's the same thing. And that's the picture. That's why God created it this way. So we have this example. And so the stories are told of the prodigal son coming back and a father coming out to greet him. And what does he do? He literally embraces his son, kisses his neck, puts a robe on him, and gives him a ring. And then they kill the fattened calf and have a party. My son, he was dead, and now he is alive. So what was that whole thing? I want to go my own way. I got it figured out, boss. Give me the money. I'm going to be, I'm going to run this show. And what ends up happening? The father knew this. The whole idea of this is we have to understand the father's nature and character. We come back to him, and what do we see? Purpose. Right? We're emptied of all of these things we think are going to bring us peace. And we go, you know what? My father actually has a pretty nice house. And as you approach him, he runs out to greet you. But here's the crazy part. He knows you're a son. You have forgotten. And what does he put on your finger? And this is one of the biggest things for me. He gives you a ring. Well, in those times, what does a ring represent? The ring was a signet ring. The ring was a signature. And what was the signature at the time? It wasn't, a pen on paper. It was the impression of the family name. Think about that, a signet ring with like a coat of arms or a symbol on it, and it would be pressed into wax over the envelope to show that it hadn't been read. It was a symbol. It was a impression of the father. And if you think about that, what an incredible concept of what we are to be in this world. As we come back to the Father's house and we know his nature and character, we have to go through these things to understand and to see. Consider it pure joy when facing trials of many kinds. Why? Because you end up at that point exhausting yourself and experiencing him anew. Steve talked about Mike Ostel, who at that time was getting open heart surgery and was concerned. And he tells the story about these unique experiences you have are custom tailored for you, but we go into those and we're so fearful. And how many times in the scriptures does it talk about do not fear? I'm going to tell you, folks, if you haven't dealt with trauma, if you haven't dealt with pain, you haven't dealt with loss, there is this thing that happens when we come to Jesus, when we literally say and we lay it all down, is a peace that transcends all understanding. And it's so big that you have no words to describe it. You try to, you're like, oh my goodness. It was like, oh my goodness. And you're at a loss for words. But that shows you how personally God knows you. And Paul's a perfect example, right? Gets knocked off his horse. He's like, there is the path that you are on, which has trials, which has lions, which has bears, has purpose in it. Are you interested in knowing what that purpose is for you? And so, Monday through Thursday, I'm doing crypto content, right? Talking to people about when Lambo and to the moon and, oh, we're in the cycle and like, let's get that money, baby. But what I'm reminded is, as things change, as all the money goes digital, as all of these things, these are merely tools. And these tools have to be animated in a certain nature and character. How many times have you been in a situation where people have not used fair weights and measures? And what I mean by that is what Steve called truth in the transaction. How many times have you been in a situation where somebody's trying to screw you, right? They're literally trying to take advantage of you. What does it look like when we have equal weights and measures? What does it look like when we go into transactions with truth? What happens when we are in the very nature and character of God? Because we've come back to the Father's house and we have that ring, that impression of Him that understands His nature and character. We're aligned with the very purposes that He has for us, that were created in advance for us to do. And I'm going to tell you, you want to experience the greatest level of peace is that you approach this Father's house, you approach Jesus, and you literally are like, hey, how do you see this? What's up? I'm interested in knowing you. And I think one of the great things about why it's so refreshing to me, and Steve was such an inspiration to me, is this idea that he wasn't trying to put anything in between you and God. There were no middlemen. There was not like, oh, listen to me, buy my book, do this 6-week series. No, he's like, this is the living God who is alive and speaks. And that's why I think it was frustrating to me, because I would go to the church and it basically, this is what my experience was and still is today. On Easter Sunday, Jesus is alive. He is risen, and we celebrate that. And it's awesome, right? But the rest of the time, you need to come under the authority of the Bible. You need to read the Bible and pray, right? You need to do these things. And what's interesting is, well, if you really pressed a pastor or somebody like that who says, oh, you need to do this stuff, you're under this authority of the Bible. No, you're not under the authority of a book. You're under the authority of the living Jesus because He is alive. But I almost would challenge you that even in the language of saying, well, you've got to read your Bible. Well, yeah, what does the Bible say about itself? It is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. This is an account, it's a testament to a speaking and living Jesus, period. End of sentence. I mean, it was until 1444 that we had the printing press. Where do you think this stuff came from? People literally talk to a living God. Look at Cain and Abel. Cain slays his brother, and literally the God of creation speaks to him. And he says, sin is crouching at the door. You must master it. Well, it sounds like we've got choice to master it. And that's just the beauty of this whole thing, is that the refreshing nature of the gospel is Jesus is alive and He speaks. And the question is, are you interested in knowing Him? And so many people have asked me the question. They're like, well, how do I know I'm listening to Him? How do I know? Right? Are there spirits and the devil is talking to me and all this stuff? And I asked that exact question to Steve. I said, well, how do I know I'm hearing from Him? And he says, Matt, what is your intent? I was like, what? What do you mean? He's like, what's your intent? Well, my intent is to hear from Jesus. Well, guess who you're going to hear from? But I don't know how. He says, no. When we talk about a speaking Jesus, he's like, You just need to be interested. Ask him. He will teach you. He's the master teacher. Like, oh, okay. So what I've experienced, and really from this point of saying, all right, Jesus, only you have the authority to speak to me. I know that there are others, that this battle is not between flesh and blood, but it's literally a battle for the way in which we think. The mind, like literally how I think, that's where the battle is. It's lying to you, wants to change how you see your own identity. What is this world going after? Right? It's anti-human, this world that we're in. It's upside down. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing to me when you think in terms of, what if I align myself with the one who created everything, that all things were made for him and by him? And what if I acknowledge the fact that I didn't create myself? And what if I really examined this pathway and I looked into these experiences, this self cleansing nature of redemption? Because that's really what it is. You think about all these things in your past and you're like, I've heard story after story after story of those who've come to Jesus going, man, everything in my life seems to make sense. Like even this difficult stuff is redeemed. Well, that's that whole idea that it literally falls off of you. My experience was one of weight. It felt like physical weight lifted off of my back. And you hear story after story throughout history of people going, even in the midst of torture, I had peace. Interesting. So consider it pure joy when facing trials of many kinds. Why? Because they are there so that you're not deprived of the experience of experiencing God himself. And it's hard to imagine that because we are so wrought with fear. Oh no, what about World War III? Oh no, what about all this challenge and battle? God's got this. It's all a part of the plan. He's got it worked out. But then other people are like, well, why did good things happen or bad things happen to good people? And why did, school shootings happen and all these things? And Steve made it really clear. And I'm just like, well, obviously that's true. All tools are neutral and they are animated by a certain nature and character. And so what do we have? We have people who animate a gun. How would you animate a gun? You might defend your family and you might hunt with it. But at the end of the day, you're animating it. The gun's just going to sit there. Excuse me. So think about the tools that we're dealing with. So now I'm going to take it into crypto, right? Bring it back to this tool. What is decentralization? What is the blockchain? What is this distributed ledger? What is this community? What is this value? And what's amazing about it is in community, we declare our own value. That's interesting. It's pretty powerful. Because what is fiat currency except, borders and nations and leaders? It's an agreement. We agree to use this as legal tender. I can't use Canadian money. I can't use Australian PVC money. It's an agreement. And so what have we done? We've literally said, hey, this is where value is. We're going to come together. And it reminds me of the early church. In Acts 2, 42, 43, 44, and 45 is this story of this church that committed themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the breaking of bread, to prayer. And what happened in the midst of that is that people lived life together in the present, and they had compassion because they considered others in addition to themselves. They understood each other. They were in community. And when someone had a need, they're like, hey, I can help you. That's the basis of all of this, is like being known and being in community and living life together. And so what's amazing about this is we're told the entire mission of God when they ask Jesus how to pray. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. You are the most holy, supreme being of all. Your kingdom come. That sounds like the purpose right there. Your kingdom come. Your will be done. So it's your will, not mine. It's your kingdom. It comes where? On earth as it is in heaven. So there is a picture of the way it's supposed to be, and you know it, but we're in an upside down world. And so what role do we have? Building the kingdom. The kingdom, how does the kingdom come? Well, Steve asked me that question. He said, hey man, When Jesus was here, do you think that the kingdom was in the midst of them? Well, yeah. Well, guess what? You have the ability to create that yourself. How so? How do you say I have such power? Well, are you acting in your nature and character? Or are you acting in the Father's nature and character? Well, I don't know what the Father's nature and character is. Well, you can discover it. And when you align all of that with the purpose of God, right? The path you are on is one of purpose. The path you are on has purpose. And so many of us are struggling with all the pain and all the challenges and all the trials and losing track of the fact that it's actually part of the plan and purposeful. Now, we make decisions that get us into really, really bad situations, right? And sometimes those things are things we carry our lifetime. But it can all start now. And it doesn't start with you talking to me. It starts with you talking to Jesus. You literally come to him and say, hey, is this guy Crypto Heartbeat and this guy Steve? Is this really like, are you real? Like, do you actually talk with people? And one thing you're going to realize, I'm not asking you to get baptized. I'm not asking you to do anything. Frankly, I'm just basically reminding you that if in fact you believe these things to be true, right? And I am a testament that they are true. Well, I've experienced a peace that transcends all understanding. And probably you have too. And anyone that's actually lived very long with Jesus recognizes and realizes this. And they may use different terminology. And that's, I think, also a bit of a hang up for a lot of people. It's like, okay, I say Jesus is alive and he speaks. And other people would say, well, the Spirit of God in you. I'm fine with it. At the end of the day, if all things were created for him and by him, I don't care what your language is. Are you coming to a living and speaking Jesus? I was talking to my buddy Ray the other day. And I said, Ray, I said, you know what? The greatest thing I learned from Steve, I said, it's two things. The very nature of faith and the very nature of prayer, because I had them all wrong. And so I'm going to share those with you, and then we're going to be done. The first is the idea of faith. I always had the impression that I have faith. Oh, wow, you have the gift of faith. And that faith was something that I muster, right? That I'm like, well, I'm going to get my faith on. Nope, not how it works. We've heard many times in the scriptures it says faith comes through hearing. But what really illustrates this point, and what blew my mind when I understood it, is that actually when you dive into the words, the actual words in Greek and Hebrew, and you understand what is really being said there, is that faith actually comes from hearing. And hearing what? The spoken words of God. What he speaks happens. And as we seek the speaking, he gives us faith. So I think about the people that Jesus praised. There's a story of a woman who had been bleeding for, I think, 12 years. And she literally saw Jesus coming. And she said, if I just touch the hem of his garment, I will be healed. Where do you think she got that idea? Where do you think she got the idea that if she touched Jesus, it's just the hem of his garment, that she'd be healed? That's spoken to her by the living God. And what happens is she grabs that side of that tassel or that hem, and literally power goes out of him, it says in the scriptures. And he looks at her and he's amazed by her faith, that believing what I said to you would be true when you touch my garment. The same thing is true with the centurion, right? His daughter is sick. And he comes to him. And what does he do? He literally says, hey, I'm a man under authority. You don't need to come to my daughter. I have men who are under me, and I tell them to go this way and that way, and they do it. All you have to do is say the word, and he's healed. And what did Jesus? He was amazed by his faith. We think that faith is something that we muster, that we have. No, it's something that's given to us. And Steve would use the term. He would say, when Jesus speaks, he gives you an atomic packet of faith. Well, what does that faith enable you to do? Well, maybe to accomplish something, maybe to endure something. But the question is, are you listening to a speaking Jesus? There's another really great case for this. Jesus comes out of the wilderness and he's tempted by Satan himself. And what does Satan say? He knows he's hungry and he says, hey, turn these stones into bread. What does Jesus do? He says, no. Because Satan wanted Jesus to come under his authority. He said, no. Man does not live on bread alone, but out of every word that comes out of the mouth of God. So many times, Jesus literally, he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's sweating blood. He knows he's going to the cross, and he's like, hey, Father, like, is there any other way we can do this? Remove this cup from me. And what does he do? He confers with, he talks with his Father. And in that, he's changed. And that's where prayer comes in. So that was faith, an understanding that faith comes from listening and hearing the words of, the direction of, the guidance of. Not something we muster, I got to get my faith on. No, you have to listen to, and it comes through this transformation, because when we talk with him, we understand how he sees it. His will be done. It's transformative to us. And what do we get from it? Faith. That's real faith. But then what is prayer? Well, when we come to him, we think, oh, yeah, it's all about asking these things. Well, I will say, I'm not saying don't ask him for things, because Jesus asked him, hey, if there's any other way, remove this cup from me. So it's not off limits. But I would encourage you in your prayer to go to the Father and ask him, how do you see this? Show me how you see this. And that's probably the number one thing Steve ever said to me. He's like, hey, I go to him and ask him, hey, how do you see this situation? And I said, well, what do you do when somebody asks you to pray for them? He goes, I stop. I don't go, I'll put together some great words of prayer and make you feel better, Pastor. No, he said, I go to the Lord Jesus and I say, do I have a role in this situation? What do you want me? How do you see this? What is the situation? And what do you want me to say? And you think about that approach to life. And I would say that's the greatest gift I've ever received in my entire life, is this idea of saying the living, speaking Jesus is literally ever present. And you can literally say, all right, I'm dealing with some issues here. How do you see this thing? And what has been the, if you watch any of these episodes, what are the things you've seen me in real time experience? It's things like, hey, it's not falling apart, it's falling in place. Well, what does that speak to? That was literally the words of Jesus to me. It's not falling apart, it's falling in place. What things look like to you in this upside down world is that they are literally fracturing and breaking and destroying. No, they're not falling apart, they're falling in place. It's a really amazing concept when we come to a living and speaking Jesus. But here's the crazy thing. The upside down world, even within the belief systems of the organized religious system, is saying to you, no, you need to give your authority away and come up underneath the authority of the Bible. I'm not saying the Bible isn't amazing. It's amazing. But at the end of the day, anyone who tells you need to come up underneath a thing, right? A man-created thing like a book. No, what is that book? That book is an account, a testament of what Jesus said. These stories and miracles and all these things are the product of a speaking and living Jesus. That God himself is living. And if you think about this, well, this grace of God, if you look into the scriptures, you hear about people like Methuselah and Noah and all these people who, pre-flood, for example, who lived a long time. We even know about Abraham and his wife who couldn't have a baby. She's old. She's in her 90s. And you imagine there was a time when people lived longer than they do. Why would God have shortened it? Why is it now, after the flood, it's 120 years? And you don't really see anybody who lives. I don't know if I've seen anyone live past 120. I think 117 is like the highest I've seen. Imagine being 100 and living 17 more years. Hello. But imagine going from 1,000, let's say, or 900 years to now to 73, which Steve lived to. Imagine that. What is that? Why would you shorten this? Maybe because this is actually not real life. Think about this for a second. Store up your treasures in heaven. Eternity, this idea of real life. Then what is this place? We got to go through all these challenges. We got to go through all of these trials. We find ourselves at the end of ourselves and we come back to the Father and we go, so you have purpose in this path you've put me on. I now understand the fullness of your nature and character, and this is how I'm going to live my life, is I'm going to ask you how you see things, and I'm going to only do the things you tell me to do. And I'm going to literally think with you. I'm going to think with you. My intent is that I would do your will, not my will. Help me understand a perspective of what crypto is. Help me understand what you're doing in the world as it relates to the changes of these things. How do you see AI? How do you see these UAP? How do you see these political challenges and difficulties? And there's some amazing insight that comes from that. But the question is, are you humble enough to literally go to him and say, hey, what you got? How do you see this? It's powerful, like super powerful. And you have to try it on for size. And what you don't hear me saying is, you got to go to a church and get saved, brother. No, not at all. Question is, are you interested? Because when I was a kid, people were interested for me. I was just a seventh grade kid. And it was in a youth group because I thought the girls were pretty. And I got to play softball with the kids, the older kids. And they were really interested in me knowing Jesus. And I had very little interest in, I don't know, like, Jesus who? And they were interested in me knowing Jesus because they wanted credit for me accepting Jesus. And what was crazy about it is I was like, okay, what do you want me to do? And they put all kinds of pressure on me. And I think about it now as an adult, and I'm like, okay, this Jesus character is standing alone. He's not standing with churches around him. He's not standing with this belief system that you have to, get through. No, he stands alone. And he stands in the midst of the storm and he says, come, follow me. But you have to understand this basic premise. And people don't realize this within the belief systems. A lot of them, I've gone to a Bible church for a long time. They put the Bible above Jesus, a living Jesus. And if you said that to them, they'd be like, no way we're doing that. Well, your language is suggesting that. Folks, Jesus is alive and he speaks. Question is, are you interested? And I think about that. It says many times there are certain things that were made for noble and ignoble purposes, meaning there are things that, how do you become an instrument of value? Oh, Jesus, hey, what do you got? What's this plan? What's this purpose? Because I think what this life is actually is kind of like boot camp. Imagine you're a Navy SEAL. And you want to be a Navy SEAL. You're a Marine. You're like, I want to be a SEAL. Well, you have to go through some training. And what's really interesting is in the military, if you're building a group of soldiers, which it looks like perhaps that's what's happening here, do you want your soldiers to go, no, I'm going to go my own way. I'm not going to follow what the boss says. I'm not going to follow what my superior officer says. I'm going to go my own way. Nah, I'm not going to do this or that. Well, you risk people's lives. So you have to go through all of this crazy, intense training to be approved as a Navy SEAL. Funny thing is, it's a narrow gate. The path that leads to destruction is very wide. But the one that ultimately that Jesus is inviting you into is a narrow gate. And the question is, there's a purpose and a plan for you. The question is, are you going to understand that? But so many things in this world are basically saying, God's mad at you. You messed up his plan. You threw a monkey wrench in this, and he wants to divorce his people. And he sees you as detestable and disgusting. No, nope, not the case. Why are there so many stories about the father running out or going after the one that was lost? That's the whole point. The question is, are you going to recognize the nature and character of the father? You're going to come to him and go, hey, what does life look like when I follow you? And I'm going to tell you right now, get ready. It will knock the head off your shoulders. That's a quote from Steve Staggs. And that's where I think a lot of things begin. And when you start to embrace that, you're like, holy buckets. What are the implications of this? What if I actually had a proper view of money? It says very clearly, you can't serve God in money. Well, what is money? It's a tool. What is God doing with this whole crypto thing? Getting your attention is what he's doing. And all of this change and all of these things, it is collapsing in on itself, right? Satan is on the run. It's all being exposed. And this future that we're looking at, where AI and all these kind of things, everything that was done in darkness will be revealed. I was driving a golf cart through a beautiful small town in Texas, and it was kind of in the evening time, and I saw all these long shadows. You know what I'm talking about? Really, really kind of orange sun, things that looked kind of red and orange, and they were these great long shadows. Just when you take pictures, you know. And what was amazing is I literally was talking to Jesus. I'm driving a golf cart, and he says, "Isn't there beauty in the contrast?" Isn't there beauty in the contrast? If you didn't have these things that you think are like this, like, right, there's darkness and there's light, it's really hard to recognize. There's a lot of people who have gone through near death experiences, and they say that they literally experience a light that is impregnated with love. And as you encounter this, all washes away. You have nothing. And I imagine what Peter, James, and John experienced when he was transfigured. It's not just a light of exposure, it's a light that is penetrating with love for you. And to think that, well, why would he want us to be grafted into his family? Why would he created us like him? We're in his image, we're being conformed to his likeness. Why would we be on this path in this boot camp to understand the nature and character of the Father so that you are his agent in this world? And you can accomplish his mission that he set out since the beginning of time. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's the mission of this whole thing. This mission isn't one Lambo. This mission isn't some political gain. Folks, thanks for joining the Pulse today. My name is Matt. Thank you, Steve, for all that you've done. Thank you to all of Steve's family. Thank you to Carter. Thank you to all of you who have followed this stuff. This is what we do on Fridays. If you want to know more and where this all comes from, well, you can talk to the living Jesus, right? There's the first stop, the source. But if you want to understand more of why, you know, I went to a Texan meetup and met a guy named Steve, and I shook his hand. The Lord said, listen to him. And what is the greatest gift that I've received in this is really the understanding of the true living Jesus. And it's been transformative for my life. There's work to do, folks. So if you want to listen to, there's 37 episodes with Steve Staggs. It's in a playlist on this channel. It's called Right Side Up. There's a Telegram group you can come into. There's a pinned comment. It's a PDF file of the 1960s white paper. This is kind of what I call the seminal work of Steve Staggs. There's a lot of writings by him, but this is one that I think will be a good thing for you to kind of understand and relate to. But it's the product of a guy listening to Jesus for 40 years and asking him questions and expecting an answer. This isn't prophetic stuff. This isn't like some like woo-woo stuff. No, this is like what do mature people do? And what's funny is you've probably known somebody like this in your life. My grandmother, she's like, she just whisper in your ear. She'd say, he's always been enough. I mean, just speaks volumes, right? This isn't exclusive to Steve Staggs, but he continued to probe and ask and apply a discipline that he did to professional sports, to baseball. He applied that to Jesus. He had this expectation. And that's the thing. There is no end to the depth and the richness of this relationship that you can have if you're interested. But if you're not interested, I can't be interested for you. But I think we're designed. I know it for a fact that we're designed with this literally yearning for acceptance and love and wholeness. And I imagine what this heavenly thing is that he desires that this place would look like. It's driven by his man and the decisions that we make, and woman, and the decisions that we make. Truth in the transaction, love, care, fairness. And that's what I love about this community in crypto. Real people. And guess what it is? It's not a bunch of VC people and daddy was, a hedge fund manager. No, it's people who've gone through hard times. And what happens when you get together with them? They high five with you and they're like, hey, I've seen hard times. And I like the fact that money could potentially change my circumstances. But I'm here to tell you, if you're putting your faith in money, you can't serve God and money. It's called mammon, Satan himself. So put money in its proper place and ask the Lord Jesus, hey, is this path that I am on have purpose? The answer is yes. All right, what's it for you? I don't know. You got to ask him yourself. don't know. I'm not telling you what it is. I've asked him myself. Take care of yourself and do not mess with Texas. We'll be back next week with all kinds of crypto content. But, folks, we are coming into an amazing time in the world, not just because crypto is going to go through the roof, but because there's so much change. And we need to have this mooring, this rooted, we need to draw from the source. Because everybody is trying to convince you to follow something other than the living God. Have a great weekend. Take care of yourself and do not mess with Texas.